Welcome, everybody. It's December 11th, 2024. And if you don't know what that means, it's time for our prostate cancer survivorship series. Tonight, we're going to talk about Theranostics because the future is here. And when we talk about this, you will learn a lot. This is going to be a great night. I'm really looking forward to talking about it with our special guest this evening, Dr. Brandon Mancini, and we will get to that in a little bit. Tonight's event is brought to you by the Michigan Men's Health Foundation. We've celebrated all of our activities throughout the entire year, and hopefully some of you have actually taken part in some of the activities going back to June, which was International Men's Health Month, where we celebrated Blue Monday Men's Health, our Cogs and Kegs event for our cyclists in our community, Mulligans for Men, and finally our Run for the Ribbon at the Detroit Zoo on Father's Day. We had a really great turnout for all of those events, and then we finished up our year with our men's health event at Ford Field with a record number of attendees, with over 1,300 men getting screened that day and taking part in thousands of screening opportunities, educational services. And we want to thank all of our sponsors and partners for allowing us to do these kind of events. Tonight's sponsors are Blue Earth Diagnostics, Dendreon, Lantheus, American Cancer Society, and Neil King Physical Therapy. So we're really happy to do this. The PCSS series actually began when we initiated our foundation back in 2008. And I would encourage anybody who finds this worthwhile to go onto our YouTube channel, and you will find a plethora of all of our prostate cancer survivorship series events dating back to the beginning of our foundation over the years, where we've covered virtually all of the topics related to prostate cancer survivorship for men and their families. I thought I'd like to start a little bit about Theranostics. What does that mean? It actually is a contraction of two words, therapy and diagnostics. And therapy and diagnostics is actually in the forefront because of nuclear medicine. So I'd like to take everybody way back, and I mean way back, to the 1950s, early 1950s. Now, my father was a urologist, preceded me by 30 years. And he recanted a story to me once when he was in a first year class in medical school in Chicago, when Enrico Fermi, and most of you will know him because of the Fermi nuclear power plant. Enrico Fermi came from the University of Chicago over to their medical school, and he showed that if you can take chlorophyll and radio label it and actually make it radioactive by putting a radionuclide into the chlorophyll, they could trace this substance through all of the stomachs of a cow when they first learned how many stomachs the cow really has. And they showed this all through nuclear medicine, and that was the beginning of nuclear medicine. Now, back before PSA was actually discovered, and that's prior to 1979, we didn't have much in the way of diagnosing prostate cancer early. In fact, over 50% of men, once they were diagnosed with prostate cancer in the pre-PSA era, over 50% of the men had metastatic disease, which meant disease outside of the prostate and into other organs of the body. And the only blood test that we had available was an alkaline phosphatase blood test. And by the time that was elevated, that meant that the prostate cancer had already gone to the bones of that individual. As far as imaging capabilities in those days, we had basically two. We had a bone scan and we had a CAT scan. And we've used those even up to this date. But that was all that we had. And the resolution, in other words, the ability for these tools to actually detect prostate cancer at the smallest levels was just not there. It just was never accurate enough to pick up early disease spreading outside of the prostate and other areas of the body. And so we needed to improve our diagnostics. We needed to get better tools. In fact, we used to call PSA recurrent prostate cancer that we couldn't see on these scans as oligometastatic disease, which meant that we knew it was there, we just couldn't see it. Well, tonight we're going to talk about technologies that can actually see it and what makes what we're going to talk about tonight so special. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Dr. Brandon Mancini, who's actually sitting here with us this evening. He's the medical director of Banff Health, and I'm going to have him talk a little bit about Banff and what makes it so special. He's a graduate of the Wayne State University School of Medicine, and he actually went to undergrad at Michigan, which is also my alma mater. He received an MBA at the Yale School of Management, which we have not talked about as of yet. And then he was a clinical associate and as well as an assistant professor at the MSU College of Human Medicine, following which he served as the medical director of radiation oncology at Mercy Health in Grand Rapids, and now medical director of Banff Health. And I would like to welcome Dr. Brandon Mancini. Welcome for us this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. So I'd like to start out by having you tell us, first of all, Banff is a four-letter word, and it's one that we can actually say without this being rated. And I'd like you to actually explain what is Banff, what does it stand for, how did Banff get started, and what makes it unique?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so Banff stands for Bold Advanced Medical Future. And if you do Google Banff, just be careful because there are other designations that may come up. But Banff was kind of ultimately founded back kind of in the 2016 to 2018 era, where our CEO and founder, Dr. Anthony Chang, he was a PhD physicist, kind of developing novel imaging radio tracers at the Van Andel Institute down here in downtown Grand Rapids. And he was becoming increasingly frustrated with the inability to quickly or expeditiously translate what he was doing at the bench side to reaching patients, to the clinic. And so that frustration was kind of building over a long period of time where he wanted to be able to have his discoveries impact as many patients and human beings as possible. And so as those frustrations were increasing, there is an individual here, Doug Meyer, which this is all very public information, that was diagnosed with prostate cancer and was seeking innovative potential therapeutic options. And Doug Meyer and Anthony Chang were kind of connected through a mutual connection, and they traveled over to Germany to get this special type of innovative treatment for Doug's prostate cancer at the time. And Doug was so motivated by that experience and so also frustrated about the inability of that same type of therapy to be able to be performed in the United States, that he made it his mission to kind of enable Anthony and kind of ultimately the founders of Banff Health to be able to create this amazing center here in downtown Grand Rapids. And so what we are is we are the world's most advanced Theranostics center. And so you gave an excellent definition of Theranostics. And so what makes Banff unique is we have a radio pharmacy where these novel imaging and potentially therapeutic radio tracers are kind of produced each and every day, literally adjacent and under the same roof as a very advanced molecular imaging clinic where these amazing scans such as PET-CT scans or PET-MRI scans are performed kind of in the same proximity or under that same roof as where those radiopharmaceuticals are produced. And that first floor kind of sits immediately under our molecular therapy clinic, where we deliver high volume radiopharmaceutical therapies for prostate cancer, neuroendocrine tumor, and a plethora of clinical trials, kind of positioning ourselves as one of the main leaders within the whole United States to advance this amazing, innovative, and ever-changing field of theranostics, and making sure that we're leading from the front as we take this to the future.
So you use the word PET. What is PET an acronym for? And how does a PET CT or a PET MRI different from a CT or an MRI?
Yeah, so PET is short for positron emission tomography. And so a PET CT or PET MRI is a unique type of scan because an individual would come in, they typically receive a brief 30 to 60-second injection of more or less a radioactive water. So it's an imaging radio tracer or a type of radioactivity that is able to bind or connect with a unique target within our body. And so for prostate cancer, that unique target is called PSMA or prostate specific membrane antigen. And that's a protein that's found kind of in the cell membrane of most prostate cancers, both in kind of initial diagnosis as well as in the setting of cancer spread. But for that example specifically, an individual comes in, they receive this injection, and that radiation medicine or imaging radio tracer is engineered to go and bind only to PSMA. and not to bind more non-specifically to other areas within the body. So a patient comes in, they get their injection, they do sit in a room for about an hour or so, and then they undergo this very brief scan here at BAMF with a total body PET CT. And literally, the PET is absorbing the radiation that is being emitted from that injection that the individual had an hour before. And so, what's possible is that you can localize where those emissions of radiation are coming from. And that's really a microscope or a magnifying glass into the body as to where these areas of prostate cancer are located. So injection takes place, injection goes and binds to prostate cancer. It just sits there and gives a signal, and then you complete the PET CT or PET MRI, and that's absorbing that radiation and telling us exactly where the body it is. Now, the CT or MRI component, most commonly across the state and across the country and world, would be the PET CT, where the CT is computed tomography, and that is allowing us to localize exactly in the body where that where that PET signal is coming from, because the PET by itself would literally look like little bright dots on a screen. And so you do the CT or the MRI to be able to see the organs, the lungs, the liver, the lymph nodes, the bone, so that if there's a little bright spot in somewhere in the pelvis, you can say, oh yeah, sure enough, that's from this quarter-inch little lymph node here in the right pelvis, etc. And now an MRI is kind of an additional kind of lens or specific ability to clarify what you're seeing. And that is typically a non-radioactive type scan. It's utilized for kind of unique areas of the body, most commonly as opposed to a total body scan. But that can be very informative in really truly understanding that underlying anatomy when it's all said and done, because its ability to have a super high resolution and see things with a great degree of clarity.
I have a lot of patients who ask, when they inject me with this, am I radioactive? Am I going to glow in the dark?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, not commonly, and all jokes aside, I mean, not really at all, because the dose of radioactivity is just so low. And it really dissipates, specifically a gallium-68 PET scan, for example, for prostate cancer. That's one type of imaging radio tracer. Really, that's out of your system within about 6 or 7 hours completely. And it's just such a low dose with such a low deposition of that radiation that it's quite safe overall.
So no issues of hugging their spouse or anything afterwards. They're good to go.
Right, absolutely.
That's great. So you talked about a little bit about the PSMA uh, PET scan. Now, does every prostate cancer cell secrete PSMA or have it on its cell surface?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer is no, but luckily most do. And so that's why it's an incredibly useful tool. Most estimations are greater than 80% of prostate cancers do have the PSMA protein located within that cell wall. And so one would anticipate that most patients undergoing that type of examination would have a high likelihood of that being a useful test for them. But if it were to come back negative in the sense of kind of a previously proven diagnosis of prostate cancer, then we would look into other modalities to try to localize where that PSA might be emanating from.
So, PSMA PET CTs really have only come into the forefront in the last few years, and they didn't even exist prior to then. And getting them authorized by insurance companies is sometimes a bit of a challenge. In the UK, where they have the National Health Service, the NHS, they use PET CTs with PSMA reagents as a standard of care for staging with newly diagnosed prostate cancer. And that is kind of one of our goals and hopes within the United States. And we've had talks with many of the insurance carriers of how do we get them to see that the advantage. Because there have been some studies that show that up to 40% of men who were thought to have clinically localized disease did not and would not benefit from local curative therapy based upon the results of their PET CT using a PSMA reagent. And so we're hopeful that this will actually be changed going forward. For men who have recurrent prostate cancer disease, where their PSAs start to rise after definitive local curative therapy, PSMA PET reagents are actually authorized and can be used for imaging and then as we're going to have you talk in a little bit. I mentioned earlier about oligometastatic prostate cancer. You're still on the cusp, of having experienced all of this. As a urologist, that was the most painful part of our practice is to have men come into the office with a rising PSA, although very minimally rising, but enough that we could detect it. And yet the scanning technologies we had available could not tell us where it was, and we knew it was there. And so that's why we called it oligometastatic, which meant a very, very small amount of cancer somewhere in the body that has spread outside of the primary target region. And really, it was more or less just our limitations more than the limitations of anything else, just the technologies. If we had the proper technologies, we could have actually done a better job. So this is the big part. This is the big moment of the night is how do we cross the bridge? And I'm talking about the bridge going from diagnostics to therapeutics.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. I think in the prostate cancer space itself, I mean, there's been just rapid evolution even over just the last couple of years. And so, just to give a little history of kind of theranostics in prostate cancer, essentially, there was a lot of work done in Germany, Australia, South Africa, and other countries where the discovery of both PSMA and the ability to not only image it but treat it kind of all occurred around the same time in 2013, 2014. And so you started having a lot of interest in that space and evolution of the ability to do that, to see the number of treatments and the frequency with which you would consider performing treatments, and a lot of kind of anecdotal experience leading up to very large clinical trials, both in Australia and here in the United States, that ultimately kind of put proof into that pre clinical trial atmosphere. And so it's interesting because it's not common that you would discover an agent that can, or a target being PSMA, that can be both imaged and treated almost simultaneously at the same time. But because of that vast history of nuclear medicine, there were a lot of smart biologists, scientists, chemists, kind of when this was all occurring in the mid 20 teens that were able to come to this. Now, in the prostate cancer imaging space, as you alluded to, I mean, the PSMA PET scan was FDA approved. There's three different agents, with others kind of coming down the pipeline as of about December of 2020. And so we've seen a huge need and interest in that space, which has been remarkable. And to your point, kind of who's imaged and when and how frequently, and how do you incorporate that into the initial versus subsequent management is continuing to evolve. And the therapy is a little bit more structured just in the United States, just for the fact that the large clinical trial that kind of proved that the therapy led to improvement in quality of life and quantity of life kind of went through its normal phases of clinical trials, meaning patients that had been through prior several lines of treatment, those were the first patients eligible for the PSMA-directed radioligand therapy. And in that setting, they found benefit from, again, a quality and quantity of life perspective. And so almost simultaneously, when positive signals started happening for those types of patients, they had trials opening that was moving the Theranostics treatment, the PSMA targeted radiation treatment, kind of earlier and earlier. And so as we sit here today, a patient that would be eligible for a PSMA targeted radioligand therapy would be a patient that has prostate cancer that had spread outside of the prostate itself, and they had been on kind of continuous androgen deprivation therapy, so medicines that keep the testosterone down continuously. But they had also been through other lines of therapy, including additional ways to kind of block the ability of testosterone to stimulate prostate cancer. And as we sit here today, some sort of what's called taxane-based chemotherapy, or just prostate-specific chemotherapy in general. So there are a lot of prerequisites right now in order for an individual to meet the FDA approved, the guideline approved, and the insurance approved indication for receiving that therapy. And centers like Banff Health and other institutions across the country have a plethora of clinical trials to continue to assist with this evolution and to getting these therapies to patients at various kind kind of lines of their cancer journey to ensure that we're doing it appropriately, we're learning collectively as a country, as a world, and that we're kind of attempting to meet the needs that patients have, which is avoiding these more non-specific treatments when and if it's possible.
So basically, so men with prostate cancer, of which 80% of their cells have this PSMA on the surface of all of their prostate cancer cells. And if they have higher grade or metastatic disease, they even have higher percentages of this PSMA on the surface of the cell. They're given a substance, this PET reagent, and when it gets injected, it binds to these cells, and then they can visualize these cells anywhere in the human body, whether it's within the prostate or the lymph nodes or the bones or any other organ within the body. It can actually turn these up. And then what you're saying is that there's what they call, you've been using the word radioligand, which is a radiopharmaceutical or a radioactive compound that can be mated to this diagnostic reagent, which is the therapeutic reagent, that can then actually go to these cells, get targeted by the PSMA, and then gets incorporated into the cell itself, and then actually kills the cell.
Yeah.
So how does it go? How does it actually work? How does it actually kill the cell? How does this radioligand or this radiopharmaceutical that gets bound to this PSMA reagent? How does it actually kill the cell?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that injection, commonly, when you get that targeted therapeutic radiation medicine, takes somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds, and that's also a radioactive water. But now that radioactive water is bringing along with it this more highly potent radioactive substance. So when it circulates throughout the body, every time the radioligand therapy interacts with PSMA, it literally binds to the PSMA receptor, so the protein that we've been talking about on that prostate cancer, and it creates a cascade or a kind of reaction where the prostate cancer cell takes in the radioligand in kind of one swoop of binding and motion. When it's taken into the cell, it's actually stuck inside the cell, and the prostate cancer cell does not have an ability to excrete the treatment from its kind of inside. And so now that treatment is literally just sitting there emitting, in this case, beta emitting, but it's emitting radiation from the inside of that cancer cell out. And the type of radiation that's being emitted does have the ability to damage the DNA of the prostate cancer. Once the prostate cancer cell's DNA is damaged, the next time it goes to try to divide and create more prostate cancer cells, it creates a cascade of reaction that says, wait a second, our DNA is broken, we can't function anymore, and then those cells would die off. And so there are certain pre-specifications where you really want on that PET scan, no matter if there's 6 spots or lots of spots, you really want them to be super, super bright, meaning that there's a lot of those little PSMA proteins sitting on those cancer cells, because those all end up being multiple binding sites for the treatment to go stick to, creating more radiation taken up into a given tumor area, and then more opportunity for that DNA damage to create positive momentum and outcomes as a result of treatment. But yeah, it's that direct radiation emission from the inside out from those prostate cancer cells, creating direct DNA damage to the prostate cancer. And the other amazing thing with the current FDA approved products are that radiation is being deposited primarily within 0.6 millimeters of where it's sitting. The total path is about 1 to 2 millimeters, but most of it is in 0.6 millimeters. And so you can imagine treating a prostate cancer tumor in a bone or a lymph node. There's very little kind of collateral, quote unquote, damage or effect of the radiation because of the physics of that emission. So it's pretty remarkable.
And how long does the radioactivity persist in the individual, and is it measurable? And how do you scan them afterwards to see the benefit of the effect?
Yeah, and so usually in the current FDA approved world with the product that can be delivered, it's prescribed one treatment every 6 weeks for up to 6 times. And the every 6 weeks is kind of taking advantage of the known half-life of that radio tracer. So if someone was injected today, so Wednesday, December 11th, A week from now, next Wednesday, that radiation medicine is half as strong. A week after that, half as strong, et cetera, et cetera. And so it goes through approximately 6 half-lives, or that radiation medicine decays over a period of 6 weeks, where it's not really giving any meaningful radiation at that time. And then the patient would be due for their next treatment, and they kind of re-up the radiation intensity at that time, and it goes through that same decay pattern. So they kind of very intelligently kind of created an interval to take advantage of how the radiation is deposited. Now, to your point, one of the most amazing aspects of Theranostics is not only you get the PET scan, it shows you the target, you get the treatment, it connects to target, but then the treatment itself can serve as an imaging agent, typically the day after treatment. Meaning, if a patient was treated today, our typical process is that patient comes in tomorrow, roughly 24 hours later, and they simply lay down on a different type of scanner called a SPECT scan. And basically, a SPECT scan has similar properties to a PET scan, but it's just responsible for also absorbing radiation rays that are being emitted. And so when the patient gets the treatment for their prostate cancer and they come back the next day, they are definitely emitting radiation from those unique prostate cancer spots. And someone lays down, they do this scan that takes about 15 or so minutes. And then you can reconstruct that and create an image, and you can literally see the medicine in the cancer spots the day after treatment. And where that becomes amazing is we always know that PSA is super important, but now it gives us an idea of what PSA correlates with what number of disease sites. It allows us to measure the brightness of each individual spot and how it changes every 6 weeks. And so that patients and families are provided with instantaneous feedback the day after treatment as to the insight of what's going on and how things are responding. And it really mostly allows us to avoid more testing outside of the treatment day and the post-treatment imaging, right? So even from it allows us to personalize the treatment the best. It's a very cost-conscious way of doing it, and it's leveraging the inherent properties of the treatment to show us what's happening. And that's very novel and very unique to theranostic type treatments.
How radioactive are individuals after they've been treated? And can they, how do they have to worry about how many half-lives afterwards before they can actually be close with their children or grandchildren or people around them?
That's a great question. So commonly, everyone would be measured with a Geiger counter kind of upon leaving. So there are current regulations in the United States. This is all an outpatient procedure. So there's no radioactive doses in the United States that are currently being delivered that would require someone to be hospitalized to let it kind of quote unquote wear off a little bit before going home. Now, that is much different than other countries which have a little bit more strict regulations at the current time. But what typically is recommended is that patients actually drink a lot of fluid for 2 to 3 days after treatment, because as that radiation medicine circulates around, it's going to bind to those prostate cancer spots within a matter of hours. And then it's up to the ability to actually urinate out the excess medication over a period of 24 to 48 hours. And so honestly, the quicker someone hydrates and the more that their kidneys filter out that extra radiation, the quicker their total body radioactivity goes down. Now, for family members, the typical recommendation is remaining at a distance of 3 feet for 3 days for any type of adults, and 3 feet or more for 7 days for any pre-puberty children or pregnant women or women attempting to become pregnant. And that's just to ensure that every last ounce of radiation is not getting to these individuals. Because in theory, if one was exposed to too much radiation consistently, right? I alluded to one treatment every 6 weeks for 6 times. If someone was close to that loved one that was radioactive for multiple days in a row, now for 6 times over a period of 7 to 8 months, there would be a slight increased risk that healthy individual, family member, loved one could be at risk for developing a cancer years down the line from that radiation exposure. And so that includes potential different sleeping arrangements, bathroom arrangements, et cetera, for a couple of days. And luckily, most can accommodate that and keep everyone safe. So.
So this is really not a new phenomenon as far as patients being treated with radiotherapeutic options and then, emitting radioactive energies afterwards. Many of us can remember the days of the iodine 125 radioactive seed placement as well as palladium 103. Those are the two reagents that we commonly use. And people would have to literally wear lead on their laps if their grandchildren wanted to sit on their laps for several months afterwards versus just 3 days.
Yeah.
So we dealt with this, quite a bit. How does nuclear medicine, how does it work? In other words, you just can't have a reagent and hold on to it forever and ever and ever. It has a period of time that once you create it. So how do you create this compound, and then how do you store it, and then how long do you have till you inject it to use it?
Yeah, so for imaging and therapy are a little different. So for imaging agents, we produce those all on site. And there's kind of ability to produce the imaging radio pharmaceutical or radio tracer. And then that's kind of done, radiochemistry is performed to create the actual imaging agent, which is three components. It's the actual radioactive kind of drug or imaging agent. It's a linker, and then it's something called a ligand, which is going to be the thing that binds to PSMA in this example. And so there's a huge production in order to generate the imaging agent. And then there's a quality expectation. It has to have certain purity elements. It has to meet certain parameters where you're producing a high quality, safe radio pharmaceutical prior to injecting. And so for an individual, if it meets those parameters, you typically would time out how much is produced and the time window with which you can inject that individual for the imaging. Because to your point, if you go too late, it might have decayed or kind of wore off too much, and then you're not getting an adequate picture of what's going on. And so that interval varies. It does depend on how much is produced and kind of the time interval and so forth. Now, for the therapeutic medications, those are all patented and those come from a third party at the current time. And so those come pre-prepared in a vial that's actually ready for injection. And so upon reception of that, there's always going to be kind of an expiration date, which is typically up to 12 to 24 hours, depending on when it was produced, kind of in their cycle. But that means that they can only guarantee the dose level and the kind of quality and purity for that given time, because as it's sitting there in that vial, there's other potential reactions, not only the decay that can happen over time. And so definitely something that you're ensuring that everything has a very kind of straightforward, process-focused operation in order to do this right, to do this safely. And then once we actually receive that third-party therapy, you kind of have nuclear medicine technologists that go into this unique room called a hot lab that has all this cement and lead kind of encapsulated within it, and they verify the dose. It's verified by multiple individuals on our own machine. You verify the dose you delivered. You verify any residual that was left in the little syringe that you used to deliver. So there, within this nuclear medicine space, there are so many regulations, and that's obviously to keep people as safe as possible to ensure we're doing the right thing and best by the patient. And it takes a lot of kind of infrastructure knowledge and know-how to get those processes down. And then it's all about that replication.
I just think this is incredible, and people really need to understand that the logistics of this process are really cumbersome. And the equipment that it takes to develop these radiopharmaceuticals is incredibly challenging. And I hope that people will get a chance to see the facility, maybe go online and look at BAMF facility just to see, how the structure was actually created, to get an idea of how these facilities around the country are actually created to actually develop these radiopharmaceutical agents that can treat patients, so that when you show up for your treatment, you have to think of the number of hours that people have to spend and the amount of technology to create these reagents to get just one treatment. And if I'm not mistaken, you have a fairly unique process in the fact that you do the SPECT scan the day after administering the radiopharmaceutical, the theranostic procedure for prostate cancer, and that over time you've actually had the ability to shorten the treatment process. So not everybody's getting a full 6 treatment sessions.
Yeah, and really it's just kudos to those in Germany and all the other countries that kind of laid the foundation because I was lucky enough to spend a couple of months over in Germany prior to Banff Health kind of going live for patient care to kind of get that very involved, intense experience to learn kind of how people had been doing it for the last 8 years before all of a sudden America had the ability to move forward with offering these types of therapies. And what they did there, they realized very early on that Theranostics is truly this see what you treat, treat what you see phenomenon. And so there are meaningful percentages of patients where when you do treatment, after 2 or 3 treatments, you do the post-therapy scan and you can see these areas that were involved by prostate cancer dwindle and even become not visible anymore or just faintly visible. At the same time, the person's usually feeling better. And we do see drops in PSA at the same time as well. And so, right from our launch back in August of 22, we implemented the experience of Germany, Australia, and others where if patients have dramatic PSA improvements and dramatic reduction of what is seen on the SPECT scan, that's a natural time to take a break because almost what I alluded to earlier, where you kind of need a cluster of cells where you have lots of binding points. And so if that cluster becomes almost essentially nothing, waiting for potential reaccumulation is a safer, better outcome. And so a large portion of patients are lucky to be able to receive a couple of treatments and take meaningful breaks in therapy. Now, what does that mean? Usually they continue their androgen deprivation therapy, so their medicines to continue to keep the testosterone down. But they can, on average, go anywhere from 7 to 8 months to all the way to, we have a patient at 25 months from receiving treatment number 3 of Pluvicto. So they have 3 more treatments. And at the time that this individual was treated, Pluvicto was the last thing they were eligible for. And now we fast forward 25 months later, and the radiation medicine completely changed the trajectory. And we can have those 3 additional treatments in our back pocket to apply. And so at a later time point if needed. So, but without the post-therapy imaging, that makes it quite difficult to make these types of decisions in real time. You can still do it, but you would have to rely on more expensive tools like a repeat PET CT, as we've talked about, and others, where it's very empowering to do something immediate, get the feedback immediately, and compare that apples to apples over a period of several months to make those decisions in real time. So it's not required to undergo a scan the day after. And so it's better that institutions across the country have these therapies to be able to offer, but kind of that next line of personalization comes by doing that day after scan.
So you mentioned Pluvicto, which is one of the branded or proprietary radiopharmaceuticals used to be the therapeutic part of the treatment for prostate cancer that binds to the PSMA membrane within the prostate cancer cell. Um, there was some news today. Literally, I just saw it earlier this morning that came out from Michigan State University, where they're doing research in their facility for rare isotope beams. And they call it farm to table. Kind of clever on Michigan State University, where they created Promethium 149. Now, I don't know anything about this. This is not my area of expertise by any means. But what it shows us is that there's this incredible amount of research going on right now for these radiopharmaceutical, these novel therapeutic and diagnostic products to advance treatment of malignancies within the human body. And so I think that this is amazing. So I'm just out of curiosity, what do you think diseases other than cancer will be next for Theranostics?
Yeah, and yeah, great point for what you just said. And so it's not only the current the lutetium-based products that we've kind of used. It's these novel next generation radioisotopes with different activities and ways that they're deposited. Now, in other disease sites, there's benign diseases such as endometriosis. There are potential in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, where if you're able to utilize imaging, diagnostic radioisotopes, and you can create a structure that is accurately and consistently binding to something different that's going on. Again, endometriosis, Alzheimer's, the plaques that can develop in one's brain. You can then swap out, just like we do in prostate cancer, the imaging tracer for the therapy tracer, and then potentially apply that across the board. And so it's very, very exciting to expand not only prostate cancer and others, but into these benign conditions that typically rely on oral medications that have potential side effects or surgical procedures that might be able to create some side effects long term or unable to do after a certain period of time. The fact that the Theranostics approach is quote unquote minimally invasive, right? It's an injection through the vein is pretty remarkable. There's been a lot of buzz into stronger radiation medicines that deposit that radiation even after over an even shorter radius, so even more finite, more focused, potentially able to kill single cells when it's all delivered. There's recent buzz in patients with meningiomas, which are typically benign brain tumors, but can behave a little bit more aggressively, where one of the FDA approved products of Theranostics has activity within that space as well, which was just presented in October of this year at the National or International Radiation Oncology meeting. So to your point, a lot of buzz, a lot of investment on the pharmaceutical company side into the R&D process, the patents, the things that are going to kind of facilitate healthy growth over the next 5 to 10 years. And so it's remarkable. It's exciting. It's all precision based, and that's what patients want. That's what providers want. While chemotherapies have been completely critical and important and have been life changing in a very positive way, we all know that they typically have a certain degree of side effects, and the ability to separate ourselves and continue to personalize someone's treatment journey is possible. And Theranostics is one of the major pillars for the foreseeable future.
And I know earlier you mentioned about these drugs, these reagents, and this process, Theranostics, is actually presently being used for later stage disease. But it's really clinical research trials that are going to help us move these processes, these precision technologies up the food chain. And what I mean by that is to earlier stage disease for men who perhaps will elect to have local curative therapy, but they want to make sure it's all been treated. And so perhaps this will be something that can be done as adjuvant therapy or in addition to some type of surgical procedure, especially as the newer radionuclide reagents come out that have even less toxicity and need maybe less treatments. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. And so I'm encouraging anybody who's watching at this point in time is to stay tuned for clinical trials that are available within your community, because there may be something that'll be just ideal for you, that'll have less toxicity and give you a better quality of life. And it's important to see all the things that are going on around you and to ask your treating physician what clinical trials are available in your community or around your community, and look at organizations like BAMF and others that are within your community that offer advanced prostate cancer therapeutics. Back in 2015, our organization, the Michigan Men's Health Foundation, formed the Blue Fund, which is a very unique fund. And we started this fund specifically for men who are newly diagnosed with prostate cancer who are facing personal financial hardship, because we know that men, when diagnosed with prostate cancer, if they're facing personal financial hardship, have a greater than 50% mortality rate if they are facing that issue. And we know how important personal finances are. So we have done everything we can to help men out who are facing this difficulty so they can concentrate on their treatment and their survivorship versus their personal finances. I am aware that BAMF has created a foundation, and it just was recently announced, and it very cleverly is called FMAB, as a reverse of BAMF. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about it, and if we can share a little bit about Kid Rock and why that name is important.
Yeah, no. So yeah, FMAB, or the Foundation for Medical Advancements and Breakthroughs. So BAMF backwards is our nonprofit foundation that was recently announced with kind of an initial seeding donation by Kid Rock Foundation due to kind of a personal family experience where his father was treated here at BAMF Health. And they wanted to be able to, because of the experience that occurred throughout that care, wanted to be able to give back and quote unquote pay it forward and contribute to those that follows because they believe so strongly in the power of theranostics, and they want to help enable others with the opportunity to kind of be able to kind of have treatment within that space as well. And so FMAB will go directly to patients, whether it's a supporting research, whether it's patient assistance from a financial perspective for accommodations, travel, copay assist, et cetera. But it's a very amazing opportunity where we can continue to build on donations in the years and months ahead to be able to advance things more quickly and take advantage of the amazing treatments of Theranostics and the technologies here at BAMF Health. But we're incredibly grateful to the Kid Rock Foundation, the Ritchie family, for kind of that support. And it's so meaningful that they wanted to share their love for BAMF Health and the experience that they had paying it forward for the future and for the advancement of treatments and imaging in this space. So we're eternally grateful.
So, what do you think is going to be the future of theranostics now that we've covered this topic pretty well today? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's cliche, but the possibilities are endless, and that's 100% the truth. But what we're going to see is we're going to see the standard of care therapies moving earlier in the disease course for prostate cancer. To your point, even in the localized prostate cancer setting, there have been trials of doing those treatments before surgery or potentially before and in addition to radiation therapy. You're seeing more novel radiotherapeutics come down the pipeline where it's going to have even less side effects or potentially being able to be kind of the nail in the coffin for the cancer when you can deliver a more focused, strong radiation in a patient that is responding. There are the 20% that don't have PSMA expression, that there are novel targets being discovered where you can focus on that as well. Combination therapy, so maybe a mixture of a theranostics medicine with an other type of oral anti-androgen, chemotherapeutic, other targeted agent in the medical oncology space might lead to significant advantages. There's personalization of dosing, right? So it's a certain dose every 6 weeks for 6 times. And that's truly just the beginning. It's likely that increasing the dose in certain circumstances is appropriate, and even decreasing the dose in certain circumstances is appropriate. It's moving those treatment cycles, maybe not 6 weeks, maybe it's 2 weeks for certain situations, 12 weeks for others, et cetera. And it's personalized dosimetry, meaning when a patient gets that treatment and comes in for the day after treatment scan, you're able to accurately analyze the dose that was absorbed by every single tumor in the body, as well as our normal tissue structures, and to empower the treating physician to have a more personalized treatment course for that individual moving forward. It's very likely that stopping at 6 treatments is not necessary, and if patients are continuing to respond, then continuing down that pathway is important. So I think big time more personalization in every aspect of the treatment, novel therapeutics, combination therapies, and just that better understanding so that we can create more undetectable PSAs, zero PSAs in the setting of known stage 4 disease in order to create more quality time, more quality of life for longer periods of time. And it's absolutely happening now and will continue to happen as we move forward.
Well, the story you're telling us is so fantastic and so much appreciated in having you here. I know you're only 39 and you have so much of your career ahead of you. And it's kind of something that you probably aren't even thinking about, but what would you want to be your legacy as a physician?
Yeah. I mean, I'm University of Michigan grad, so it is all about the team, the team, the team. So, I mean, I would want the legacy to be that Banff Health was known as kind of the United States um, just kind of foundation for the growth, development, advancement of Theranostics, and that Banff Health enabled expansion of Theranostics at a pace at which it couldn't have happened without its existence. In its collaboration, in its relentless pursuit of uh, treatments for patients, helping more people, creating more happy birthdays and Christmases and holidays and et cetera. But it's really that global mission as a team. I think Banff Health is made up of a number of like-minded individuals with that same passion. It's all about the greater community. It's about advancing the science, advancing the medicine, and doing what's right for humanity. And we truly believe in Theranostics. It will be a major pillar, and more people need access to it. And so we want our legacy to be that we created that access. We created that ability for Theranostics to advance very quickly and impact so many people throughout the world. So that's kind of what that legacy would want to be.
Well, I'll tell you, I've met many of the people that you work with at Banff, and I know that your feeling is pervasive there amongst all the others. And it's a pleasure having you here. I really want to let everybody know it's a real honor and a pleasure to have Dr. Brandon Mancini here with us this evening and sharing with us his wealth of knowledge, expertise, and understanding and expression of the world of theranostics. And I hope that everybody really gained a knowledge or at least furthered some insight into the advancements in prostate cancer management that we will be all able to embrace and use as the days ahead. I do want to introduce our foundation is now the new Michigan Men's Health Foundation. And part of that is why we're having this meeting tonight with the folks from Banff. We're expanding across the state of Michigan. As we speak, we have partnerships developing in Grand Rapids and other areas around the state of Michigan. Our board is going to be expanding, our staff will be expanding, our voluntary advisory committee will be expanding. And so we're really excited to become the Michigan Men's Health Foundation and to offer the services that we do here in the greater Detroit area across the state of Michigan with many of our sponsors and partners. Remember that June will be here before you know it, since this is already December, and we'll be celebrating our Blue Monday, Cogs and Kegs, Mulligans for Men, and Run for the Ribbon at the Detroit Zoo during International Men's Health Week in 2025. And as well, we're going to be changing our prostate cancer survivorship series to the Men's Health Survivorship series. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to offer an expansion of the topics that we cover. We want it to become more men's health inclusive so that we can actually become a greater resource for our community. I do want to thank our sponsors, again, Blue Earth Diagnostics, Dendrion, Lantheus, American Cancer Society, Neil King Physical Therapy, and I especially want to thank Dr. Brandon Mancini and our partnership with Banff moving forward as far as prostate cancer survivorship. And I want to thank everybody for